What's going on, world? Coming at you guys again. We got another quick video. The Second Amendment. Let's talk about it. So, if you have the opportunity to read and watch some of my recent videos about some of my executive orders, to include the Second Amendment and the 14th Amendment, well, I've talked to you about how we are currently in a stage of coup. And that's based off of individuals whom are willingly and willfully violating the Constitution and your right to the Constitution, to the right of liberty, to include the Second Amendment, which states shall not be infringed, and the 14th Amendment, which guarantees the right of an individual to have equal protection of the law. Now, what we're going to talk about today is the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment specifically states shall not be infringed. And when you go look at the history of a firearm in America, from the 1400s all the way up until the early 1800s, with a black powder firearm, well, it required it to be carried concealed depending on the environment and the situation you were in, whether it was raining, snowing, etc., etc. Because the mechanical function of a black powder firearm required the frizzen to scrape against the plate in order to create the spark, which would go into the chamber to ignite the black powder, which would eject out the ball. Okay? Now, if that were to get wet, if the plate were to get wet, if the frizzen were to get wet, it would not create a spark, which means that it would not ignite, which means that the firearm would be worthless or useless. Now, the entire point of a firearm is for self-defense primarily, right? Unless you are engaged in some type of unlawful or criminal activity. But primarily what we're talking about right now is self-defense. And because it took 2 to 3 minutes for these individual weapons to be utilized for reloading or loading, that means it had to be loaded and ready to go at a moment's notice. Which means that if that frizzen or that scrape plate were wet from, say, rain or from high humidity, it would not function appropriately, which means it had to be concealed or wet. You know, even in old traditions of dueling, pistols were carried loaded inside of a box to maintain the integrity and to preserve the working capacity. You know, the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg already came out and she dissented in one of the previous judgments from the Supreme Court that carrying a pistol in your pocket was ingrained within the Second Amendment, right? And Clarence Thomas also pointed out, the United States Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas also pointed out the hypocrisy of carrying concealed in consideration based off of slave patrols. Now, this will be my 9th executive order. My 9th executive order will be the Second Amendment Reinforcement Act. This will mandate that any official, whether law enforcement, correctional officer, judge, prosecutor, or even president, that has worked in the capacity to infringe upon an individual's Second Amendment right, specifically to carry concealed without a permit, would automatically be disbarred. Not only that, but they would be facing prosecution from a federal prosecutor up to 10 years to life in prison. Now, it also calls for the death penalty, but I don't believe in the death penalty unless it merits the situation to where an individual just cannot be rehabilitated and they are a threat to society no matter what. So, you can look this up. The 14th Amendment guarantees the right for liberty. The Second Amendment states shall not be infringed, which includes the ability to carry concealed based off of historical context. And a judge once told me that circumstantial evidence can be used as evidence. And I have advocated for this many of times, many years ago, many moons ago, about circumstantial evidence and the conditions required in order for a black powder firearm to work appropriately and efficiently. It had to have been concealed for it to work efficiently. And to this day, I have yet to hear anything from it. So, whether you're a Supreme Court judge, whether you're a federal prosecutor or a state level prosecutor, whether you're a federal judge, whether you're a state level judge, county level judge, whether you're a police officer who testified in order to facilitate the conviction of an American citizen for carrying a firearm in a concealed manner because he or she did not have a permit, and that alone, you are guilty of violating the 14th Amendment. You are guilty of violating 18 U.S.C. 242, and you are also guilty of violating 18 U.S.C. 2383, which is crimes for sedition and insurrection and rebellion. Now, these measures must be adhered to. This would be a part of my 9th executive order to make sure that we can maintain the integrity of the Constitution and the integrity of the American people.